Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Astro Teller. Astro is the co-founder of Alphabet's Google X Moonshot Factory. It's a research program which develops sci-fi-like technologies to help solve some of the world's most pressing problems. This was a really fascinating conversation with Astro. I really enjoyed our conversation. As I say in the edited piece, in the broadcast version, I found it on the one hand very compelling, a lot of super helpful takeaways about how to approach life. And at the same time, I had some pretty sharp questions about some of the things that Astro had to share. We've begun a new sort of essay, a mini essay at the end of our edited pieces. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts on this particular conversation with Astro, you can go over there and check the edited piece, the last 3 or 4 minutes of the conversation there. Enjoy. Today's guest is Astro Teller, captain of Moonshots at Google X, the Moonshots Factory. There he's led radical innovation efforts for the past 15 years. Under his leadership, the Moonshots Factory has incubated breakthrough technologies aimed at solving some of the world's biggest problems. A computer scientist with a PhD in AI from Carnegie Mellon, Astro has founded multiple companies, authored books, and holds numerous patents in both software and hardware. And he recently launched the Moonshot podcast at South by Southwest, diving into the real stories behind audacious innovation. Welcome, Astro.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Very pleased to get to have you with us, and I've been looking forward to it as well. Fascinated with all of the remarkable kind of work that you all are doing. So let's talk first about maybe a brief introduction to X, the Moonshot Factory. And by X, we don't mean X formerly known as Twitter, but X founded by Google to do these audacious sorts of innovations at looking at some of the world's largest problems, but kind of give us a big picture description of what you all are seeking to do.
So X, which was formerly known as Google X, was set up about 15 years ago. I helped to set it up for Alphabet. Alphabet was an idea at the time, but hadn't been named yet. Alphabet is the holding company, the sort of parent. Google is the largest thing inside of Alphabet, but there are lots of other things within Alphabet, and X is one of them. X was set up, the Moonshot Factory, as a way for Alphabet to get a lot of new surface area with the world, to go find new important problems for Alphabet to work on and hopefully some solutions to those. So we focus on taking moonshots. We would describe a moonshot as having 3 basic components. In order for it to be a moonshot, at least here at X, we would say there has to be a huge problem with the world that you want to solve, and you can describe in particular why you want to solve it, why it would be good to solve it. 2, there has to be some kind of science fiction sounding product or service that you can describe. However unlikely it is that we could actually make it, we could agree ahead of time that if we made it, it would very likely solve that huge problem with the world. And then 3rd, there has to be some kind of breakthrough technology that gets us at least a chance, even a small chance, of being able to make that science fiction sounding product or service so that we can resolve that huge problem with the world. If we have those 3 things, we at least have a moonshot story hypothesis. That doesn't mean it's super likely to work, but it means that we can go test it. So we high-five each other because we have an idea that has the right form. And then if you work at X, we would say like, oh, that's awesome. We have a moonshot story hypothesis. Now, how fast can we kill that idea? Because by definition, the sort of inherent physics of innovation is if you are trying to do particularly audacious things, you will be wrong almost all the time. There is no way to avoid that. And the people who pretend that they were right from the beginning, that they're super geniuses, like that's just not how innovation works. You have to be wrong most of the time. And so the thing that makes innovation interesting, innovation is really easy if you don't care about efficiency. You just take lots of money and throw it at high energy people and you'll get some innovation, even some radical innovation. But that's not efficient. And which is why people don't do that very much. If you want to do it efficiently, that's the tricky part. And that's the reason that we describe what we do as the Moonshot Factory, because we're obsessed with taking these moonshots, and ultimately we want some of them to be successful and to end up as enduring businesses that can release this goodness to the world that we aspire to make. But we also want to do it efficiently. We're trying to systematize the process. And so the last 15 years of X has been this story where we started with a pretty chaotic environment, but there was definitely some magic here. And we're constantly trying to turn up the rigor dials without killing off the magic.
Yeah, fascinating. So you have on your website a lot of the projects that are currently being incubated and other projects that have graduated and gone on to become a manifest thing in the world. But let's talk about maybe a couple of those to give some examples. 280 Earth I found particularly fascinating. Could you describe that one to us?
Sure. So people have been working for quite a while on ways that you could grab carbon dioxide from the air. The reason that the Earth is warming is because we're putting more and more carbon dioxide into the air, other greenhouse gases as well, like methane, but the primary problem is CO2, carbon dioxide. And as we put more and more of it in the air, it creates the so-called greenhouse effect. That is, the sunlight comes into the Earth, but it can't get back, the heat can't get back out again. It's like I'm putting a blanket over the Earth. So there's lots of talk about using energy that creates less CO2, stop burning dinosaur juice, using the energy we use more efficiently, like LED lights. But the third leg of that stool is we're going to have to find a way to run climate change in reverse to some extent if humanity is going to make it. That means we need to find ways to take the CO2 that's in the atmosphere, that's in the air, and pull it back out again and stick it under the ground so that it stops creating this sort of blanket over the Earth. And how to do that is known. That's not particularly the hard part, but doing it cheaply enough that you could make a profit doing it, that people would pay you to do that. That is a very unsolved problem. And 280 Earth has come up with a way of grabbing CO2 from the atmosphere that we believe is going to turn out to be much cheaper than other ways of doing it, which we think in the end can lead it to be an enduring business that helps humanity sort of build resilience.
Project Chorus was another one that especially caught my attention, radically improving how we make, move, and manage the world's goods, and that you're seeking to deal with staggering waste. Some of those numbers were indeed staggering. So maybe a brief description of that one?
Sure. So first of all, humanity makes, sort of depending on what you count as manufacturing, several $1 trillion a year, even if you leave aside things that are made in vats. There's several $1 trillion a year of stuff like hardware, like this laptop I'm in front of, that we make every year as humanity. And we are laughably inefficient at how we make it, how much of it we make, how we move it around. I can give you an example or two, but let's say within a hospital, people will buy more of various equipment than they actually need because it's just so hard to find something that's ready to be used. Let's say a X-ray machine on wheels. They just don't know where it is. So they buy more than they need and they just leave it around the hospital. They just kind of like pens in your house. You just keep buying them until you're finding them at the same rate that you're losing them. That is not efficient. If you could know where it was inside the hospital, then you wouldn't have to buy more. Or in that same hospital, if Medtronic is making stents that go inside the heart, and you have to have them in the hospital because if you're doing a cardiac procedure and you want to put one of those inside of a person to keep their arteries open, then how many you've got in the closet really matters. So once every 2 weeks, someone goes into the closet and writes down 1, 2, 3, 4. They count them up and they write it down on a clipboard. That is not the best humanity can do. These things sitting in that closet should be able to just shout out to the cloud, "Here, I'm in here, count me," so that they're automatically counted. So the hospital knows when they need to own more, when they need to order more. The company that made them knows to send them more. None of this is automated right now. And the fundamental reason is because there are sort of tracking devices, kind of think of it as like Apple AirTags, but they're way too expensive. You can't put that on every can of Coke in the world, even every case of Coke in the world, to know where things are. And you have to find a way, if you really want to track all of the physical stuff in the world in real time and know some state about it, You can't create a lot of billions of dollars of physical infrastructure that's going to need to be set up to sense these little tags as they go through the world. So what Chorus has spent the last 6 years doing, very successfully now it turns out, is getting to the place where they can just have a sticker. They literally have a sticker. You slap it onto something and it talks to the rest of the world and it says, here I am. Here's where I've been. Here's what my state is. Things like my temperature, whether the box I'm on has been opened recently, all those kinds of things that then allows for the whole of supply chain and logistics to start to get reorchestrated, which can save, on the order of $1 trillion a year if done right.
Yeah.
And there's a huge amount of carbon footprint associated with all that waste that can be removed.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. And the numbers that point to a picture of that staggering waste. You say that every year, 20 cents of every dollar spent on manufacturing is wasted, $50 billion worth of cargo is lost, and 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted or lost while more than 800 million people go hungry. It's fascinating, just fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's step back and talk about you just a little bit. Astro, where did you get the name Astro? A school nickname, I think I read.
Yeah, it was when I was applying to Stanford, my guidance counselor, when I was applying to colleges, this was in 1987, my guidance counselor said, don't leave any blanks on your application. And the place I was most excited to go, that I did ultimately go, was Stanford. And at the time, back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, these were actual physical pieces of paper that you would fill out. And on the first piece of paper for the Stanford application, on the first line of the first page, it said first name, last name, middle name, nickname. I don't have a middle name. I literally don't have a middle name. So I left that blank. And so by the time I got to the nickname slot, I was like, I've already put a first blank. I didn't have a nickname either. I just couldn't stand the idea of leaving two blanks on the first line of the first page. And a few people on my soccer team called me Astro because they thought that my flat top on the top, I had hair on the top of my head, but no hair on the sides or back of my head. They thought it looked like a patch of AstroTurf, and they didn't mean that in a nice way. But I just put Astro there because I just didn't want to leave it blank. And they typed it in. They made a mistake, I guess, because they weren't used to no one having a middle name. And so my legal name was registered with Stanford as Astro, and it took me months to fix that with them. By then, everyone knew me by Astro, and it was just too late. So
That's
Astro
hilarious.
took me over when I was 18 years old.
That's hilarious. We're going to get to kind of some big questions about kind of how you think about the meaning of your life and the work that you all do. But before we get to that kind of starting with the end in mind, I'd like to start with a question about traits and habits. And what would you say have been habits and traits that have been most important to you? Maybe going back to your childhood, what would you identify as that's a habit, that's a trait that I had, or that was taught to me that has been very important in the development of my life?
I'd probably call out two things. The first one is I grew up in a very hyper-intellectual household. My mother's father won a Nobel Prize in economics. My father's father was Edward Teller. So even by normal hyper-intellectual households, this was sort of extreme. And my brother is just much brighter than I am. And that was obvious by the time we were very young. And so in this context in which smartness was all that mattered, I had already lost by the time I was 7 or 8 years old. And that was difficult for me. But I think it was also really good for me because it made me start thinking from an early age about what other muscles besides kind of pure intellect, abstract reasoning, mathematics, where those were the fronts on which I was going to lose. But there are lots of other ways to be smart and to sort of use your brain in interesting ways. And so from a young age, I worked hard to sort of build out a much more three-dimensional set of skills, I think, than maybe some hyper bright people do. And I think that served me very well. So I think of myself as being kind of a B plus, but across a very broad set of skills rather than an A plus at anything in particular. The other one, which is somewhat related, is, and I mentioned this I just gave the commencement speech, which you and I were talking about before at Rochester Institute of Technology. And I mentioned in the speech that I had this epiphany when I was about 20, 21 years old. I was feeling crushed under the weight of these expectations from my family about how much I should accomplish. And that just wasn't working for me. I was really stressed. And so I made a deal with myself, which is I was going to stop holding myself to the bar of how good I was, how much accomplishment I was going to sort of ring the bell on accomplishments over and over again, and instead going to hold myself to the standard of being a learning machine, of how curious I could show up and how much I was improving at whatever it is I was working on. And by shifting my focus from I'm proud of myself because I won to I'm proud of myself because I learned, because I'm curious, because I'm improving, I think my life has both been way more fun and probably more successful as a result.
Yeah.
So that's another, I don't know if you'd call that a trait or a habit.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I would love if you're open to it. What did that look like at that point at which you felt this kind of crushing weight of expectation and you finally yielded to a different way to frame thinking about your life?
What did it feel like before I clicked into it, or what did it feel like after?
Or was there some particular precipitating moment, some thing that happened in your life where it's like, okay, I can't keep doing this. I have to find another way forward.
Yeah, I was having breathing problems. I was hyperventilating a lot, and I was having some stomach trouble, which at the time doctors still believed that ulcers came from stress, which they don't, it turns out, but doctors didn't know that at the time. And so I was meeting with my doctor at age 20, 21, and he said, you're going to be dead by the time you're 50 if you go on like this, which I don't know if that's medically sound, but it doesn't matter whether it's medically sound. It really got through to me. I was like, okay, I am taking life too seriously and I'm showing up for myself in a way that's not going to scale.
Yeah.
So,
do you find yourself ever tempted to kind of fall back into that way of framing your life?
No.
Yeah. So it was just kind of a clean cut for you, clean break.
Yeah, I'm really. The question is, what are you proud of? Like, how do you define your sense of self?
Yeah.
And I just moved it, like the needle, from did I get it done? Did I win? To how well did I show up today?
Mm-hmm.
And I have control over how well I show up. So
Right.
I get to end every day. It's still a high bar. I push myself hard, but I push myself very differently than I used to. I push myself to be a good human being, to always be interested in the people around me, in their ideas, and not just my own ideas. And it turns out being that way is more fun and it's more successful, at least in the long run.
Right. Have you ever read much of the Stoic philosophers on this?
A little bit, like Marcus Aurelius kind of stuff.
Yeah. I just found that it's that's so resonant with Epictetus's Enchiridion, his little short manual, where he said that very thing of, in order to flourish as human beings, we have to let go of our expectations about things that we cannot control and focus only on those things that we can control. And that being how we show up, right? And our desires and aversions, the things we set our goals on, and then what happens in our own kind of formation as human beings. And so I find that resonant in what you're describing.
Thanks. Weirdly, I'm mildly dyslexic. So I read some, but I don't read voraciously. And I wish I did, honestly, but I don't. I also have this thing, which is really good, but it also maybe is a kryptonite. I can learn the first 20% of anything in like 1% of the time.
Huh.
but as a result, I tend to know 20% about everything. And like, I never go much deeper because it takes me just as long as it would take anyone else. I assume I've never actually gone there other than maybe artificial intelligence. Yeah. I've never gone to 100%. So I just tend to do the first like 10 or 20% of topics over and over and over again. And so my temptation to go deep on the Stoic philosophers, when I sort of get the joke and I can kind of quickly click in, I'm like, yeah, I get it. And I'm not saying that's a good attitude. That's just sort of how my brain works.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit more about the moonshot thinking, the Moonshot Factory. And in an article you wrote commemorating the 10th anniversary of X, you said, I've come to realize that our main cultural battle is against fear and the strong gravitational pull toward conventional ways of thinking and behaving. All of us have been conditioned for years not to fail, not to be vulnerable, and to minimize risk. Very helpful, provocative. To unpack some of that for us.
I'm happy to. I think the provocative thing is what to do about it. I mean, surely you didn't read that and go, oh, that doesn't resonate. That can't be right.
Yeah, no, exactly right.
I think you and everyone, when you hear those words, you're like, yeah, I know. Like, we kind of leave it in the corner because it's just so unaddressable for most of us that we just sort of look away from it. But no one's going to hear those words and be like, that's not right. We all experience the gravitational force of normalcy and conventional thinking. We all have a big pile of fears we carry around on our back. What we're going to think of ourselves, what our spouse will think of us, what our peers will think of us, what our kids will think of us, what history will think of us. Super not helpful, but that's a monkey that's on pretty much everybody's back. The question is, how do you help people put those fears down? How do you help them at least create a microcosm where for some period of time or in some context, they could feel a little bit freed from the gravitational force of conventionality, let's say. So, for example, here at X, we are specifically asking them to do that. So, in other words, if you work at X, part of you being safe is safe in the sense of like your job persists, is you need to be unconventional. Conventionality, well, the safe thing to do everywhere else is not the safe thing to do here at X. And there's lots of ways in which we help people feel that. So we can hijack your desire for safety, but put it into this new context.
Would you talk more about the ways you have sought to cultivate what you call radical creativity?
I don't know how much creativity itself can be taught, but there's a lot you can do to unblock creativity. Most people, when they were 5, were creative. I was. I bet you were. I bet you every listener on this podcast says, yeah, I was pretty creative when I was 5. So what happened to it? It's already in you. I'm not going to make you creative. I don't need to make you creative. You were already creative when you were 5. Something went away. But I don't think it's gone. It's just hiding under like a big pile of societal crap that got stuffed on top of you. You've been taught to follow rules, don't embarrass yourself, get short-term outcomes so that you can get praise from your parents or your teacher or your first boss. All of these things just stack up 100 reasons not to be creative, but it's still inside you.
What are ways, if you find yourself stuck or you find some of your peers, they find themselves in a place of being stuck, what would be some sort of practical guidance, advice you'd give on getting unstuck and cultivating anew that creativity that's latent within us?
You can't solve it just with external trappings, but I'm literally wearing a Phoenix hoodie and I have wheels on my feet right now, rollerblades, which I wear every single day. Do wearing rollerblades make you creative? No. But doing things that are silly, doing things that could otherwise invite some teasing or embarrassment creates a sort of daily practice to not worry about those things. So you don't have to, if you work at X, I don't need you to wear a hoodie that with a phoenix on it, but what are you going to do? I would challenge you over and over again. How are you showing up silly? How are you showing up sort of relaxed and open? At least trying vulnerability on for size just to see what people here will be like. And then I hope that the people here at X in particular will reward you by liking you more, by inviting you into their sort of conversations more when you are sillier, when you are more open. And then that silliness and that open, that's actually the raw material for the creativity.
Would you count that invitation to silliness, this sort of call to vulnerability, that one of your top 5 commitments at X?
Top 5 commitments. Well, I mean, I'm taking that question seriously because there's a poster taped up outside my door, which has sort of my baseline commitments. And I think the word vulnerability is not there, but humility is, a growth mindset is, being open to being wrong, being curious and excited about other people's thoughts, never using fear as a mechanism for creating order. Those are the things that are on the poster. And I think if you do those things, vulnerability has a lot more space to breathe.
Yeah.
So just in fairness, I don't think the word vulnerability is on the poster, but I think spiritually it is.
I'd love to unpack some of those. So I think that in the tech world in particular, humility is not something that I would think in the American kind of cultural trappings. I think if people thought about tech, they wouldn't normally think humility, right? So how's that worked for you in the kind of high level of the tech world to call upon your peers to practice humility? Or what is it, or maybe another kind of way to put it is, what has that looked like institutionalized for you all there?
I mean, here's part of why I think it's so important. I mean, aside from generally, I think we're good people if we don't take ourselves too seriously. I'd rather hang out with people who are more like that. I bet you would too. But there's something more specific that really matters here. If you're taking moonshots, your audacity needs to be through the roof. Because if it's not, you won't start on the kinds of crazy, unlikely journeys that just might change the world. Silicon Valley generally has a pretty good, audacity meter. I would like to think X's is particularly high, but that's not that unusual. But as soon as you do that, you're going to be wrong. We're going to be wrong 99% of the time. And so if you start on some journey, flying cars, the teleporter, whatever it is that you're going to do in your first day here at X, first year here at X, if you believe that you're right, you will take us ruinously far down that journey, and we will only find out many dollars and many years from now that you were wrong. We can only afford to take moonshots because we stop them early when they're not working. And not only stop them early, but I want you not to be in the mindset of, I've got to make the teleporter work. That would be a horrendous idea for you to have, especially in the first 2 or 3 years, since the chances are way less than 50% that it will work. I need you to have the attitude, why won't this work? I'm going to pressure test this to find out where it breaks. That activity can't happen without having humility that is as high as the audacity. If the humility is low, then you get what happens in most of the rest of Silicon Valley, which is someone says, I know the future, it's whatever they say, flying cars. And then they go ruinously far down the journey. And of course, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 are right, and a lot of news gravitates to them. But as a basket, that class of investments, venture capital as a class of investments, doesn't make money. It's just gambling.
Hmm.
I know that's not a very popular thing to say, but that's why the humility has to be as high as the audacity.
Huh.
And you have to be hungry to discover you're wrong.
Yeah. Why do you think that posture of this willingness to discover that you're wrong, what's the genealogy of that in you? Because I think I can look at that genealogy in me and know that I'm a recovering perfectionist, and certainly in my childhood, knowing things and knowing we were right had a very high value in the context I was raised in. And so it took a long time for me to get much more comfortable with being able to not only seek to fail, as you are prescribing for us in our various projects, but even sometimes to simply, apologize when it was obvious that I was wrong. And so I know the genealogy at which that began to change in me, the time in which that began to change for me. So my question for you is, how did that willingness to be wrong, the willingness to kind of pursue this as a way of life, how did that develop in you?
You know the joke, there's a drunk hanging on a lamppost looking around, and the cop comes over and is like, "Hey, are you okay, buddy?" "Oh, yeah, I lost my keys." Oh, the cop says, no worry, I'll help you look for them. And the drunk says, "Oh, don't bother. I lost them over in the bushes. I'm just looking here because there's more light." I experience a lot of life that way. What I just described to you isn't a nice to have. It's like the physics of innovation. So if that's the way it works, okay, I guess that's how we need to be.
Huh. So not so much a kind of moral choice as much as a sort of, this is simply what you have to do if you're going to be innovative.
Be honest. What's actually required in order to, in this case, I've been working on this for 15 years now, make a moonshot factory successful, to systematize and make efficient radical innovation. I mean, I've described some of it. I can describe more. It's all pretty straightforward stuff. The thing is, people don't do it.
Yeah.
But if you start with the end in mind, like what is the actual physics, what we have to do, then you work backwards from that. You're like, oh, I guess humility has to be as high as audacity, or this whole thing doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of inevitability. And then you say, okay, how am I going to show up that way? How am I going to encourage other people to show up that way?
Yeah. When you think about the meaning of your life, or do you have a kind of coherent philosophy of meaning of your life, or some of these things that you've just been describing kind of central to your thinking about the meaning of your life?
I do. I'll try to give you the TLDR, but for people who are interested, I gave a talk on what I think the meaning of life is at the Wall Street Journal Future of Everything conference about a year and a half ago. It's online if people want to look it up. I guess I would summarize it this way, though. I don't think there's any inherent meaning in life. I came to this, I've had a lot of epiphanies in my life, just sort of clicked in on things. I was standing on the side of a soccer field. I was maybe 10 years old. I was feeling really nervous about the game we were about to play. I was about as competitive as you could be when you were 10 years old playing soccer. Anyway, I was nervous. And then I thought, why am I nervous? It's just a game. It doesn't matter. And then I thought, oh God, all of life is like that. And then I thought about the game of soccer I was about to go play. I mean, I could not be stressed, I guess, by just thinking over and over again, this doesn't matter, but I'm not going to have a very good time playing the game if that's like what's going on in my head. You need to give yourself to the game and imbue it with meaning, and then take on some of the stress that comes with that in order to have a good time playing the game. And I believe life is like that too, where you choose to imbue it with meaning. I have chosen to imbue it with meaning so I can enjoy it. I want to be a good person. I want to find ways to be able to spend my time with people who I value, and try to, leave the world a little bit better than I found it. Like put some positive ripples out into the world. That's what gives my life meaning, is having fun, growing as a person, supporting the people around me and trying to have some net positive benefit in the world.
Yeah. So in philosophical terms, a sort of existentialism where you deny that there's some sort of big story or big truth, and yet don't lay down in meaninglessness, but choose to, to use your language there, imbue your life with a certain meaning that then you can find some sort of joy in. Yeah. So with that, when you talk about positive ripples, I think was the language that you used. How have you thought about defining what a positive ripple is? If your fundamental commitment there is no meaning as such other than what you imbue with meaning.
Well, so one of the principles that we have here at X, which partly comes from what we were just talking about, my perspective on the world, is we are only fishing for moonshots at the intersection of purpose and profit. That's an axiom. Like I can't prove that that's better, but that's better for us. That's what we're going to do. I feel really good about that. And I think everybody at X does. And you mentioned the podcast that if people search for Moonshot Factory, Moonshot Podcast, our podcast will come up. There's 10 episodes, they're about 50 minutes each. And if people listen through it, which I think is a really fun listen, you'll get to hear a lot of these ripple effects. So I'm going to answer your question, but I just think your audience would really enjoy listening to some of these positive ripple effects because it's really what the podcast is about. I feel really good nurturing other people. I'm a nurturer. I'm a big brother. So I think there's something kind of fairly hardwired in me about feeling like that. Being good to other people, helping them be the best version of themselves, lifting them up, investing in them over long periods of time, that leaves me feeling like I didn't waste my time. That's a meta answer. The sort of ground level answer is, if you worked at X, we're really serious about only doing things that are at the intersection of purpose and profit. But I'm not going to prejudge what is a huge problem with the world. I would say, tell me a story. What is it you want to work on? Why do you think this would be so good for the world? I'm really curious. I'm open to your story. It doesn't need to be my story. I haven't pre-decided it's all climate change, or it's got to be connectivity, or they're all problems. Humanity has more than enough problems. So I'm kind of excited about whatever you're excited to work on. And I get to learn when you have something, a problem in the world you're excited to go tackle. But I would put it on you. Tell me a story. And if that story isn't good enough, or even worse, if it's really just like moving money from one person's pocket to another, that's just not our jam. And I think we can mostly agree when we bang on it together. Is that really good for the world, or just like, meh?
Yeah.
We haven't had a lot of arguments here. Everyone sometimes they're less sexy, but if you dig for even a little bit, most people are like, yep, that would be great for the world. And sometimes it doesn't matter. Like if one person says we can cause the end of cavities in people's teeth, and the other one says we can cure epilepsy. I don't know if you can really put those on the scales and say which of them is better than the other one. They're both good for humanity. I don't have a need to sort of have some sort of problem Olympics. As long as we're working on real problems, I'm excited.
Yeah. So when you say you're working at the intersection of purpose and profits, do you have some sort of working operation of purpose, a working definition of purpose, or does that relate more to the invitation to be told a story?
Yeah. Like I said, sometimes, like the chorus example we were talking about earlier, is that sort of sexy, like handing, stew to a starving person kind of sexy? No. is it actually helping humanity sort of be better at sort of getting on in life and using the world's resources more efficiently? Yeah, massively. So I feel really good about that. We just graduated a project. I'll give you something in a very different category. It's now an independent company. It's called Tara. And it has a box a little bit smaller than a traffic light. It's called a light bridge. And it shoots light up to 20 kilometers. It has to be able to see another one of these boxes. You just strap these two boxes, one up to 20 kilometers apart, on two different poles or sides of buildings or whatever. And then they send 20 gigabits per second, the same thing you would get in a fiber optic cable, only you don't have to trench the fiber optic cable. You can put it up in an hour for a microscopic fraction of trenching the fiber or even hanging it across poles. And so if you have some, village in Ghana, in 1 hour, boom, all of a sudden, 20 gigabits per second broadband, where before they had like 3G. So super technical project, but can we squint at that and be like, is that good for the world? Of course, the internet is not perfect. There are dark parts to the internet, but on balance, bringing connectivity to parts of the world that had little or none of it before, we can feel really good about that.
So I want to ask a follow-up question to this, but would you talk first about how the notion of 10x has been important for you all, and how solving a 10x issue is much more different and maybe easier even than a 10% improvement?
Sure. I mean, this is definitely a mantra here at X. It's part of the joke. X is, 10 Roman numerals. But part of the idea is, if I ask you, let's say, to make a car run on a gallon of gasoline for 50 miles, maybe you could do it, but man, you'd have to be smart. And you would inevitably try to take what everyone else has done and then be a little smarter than them. Wow. Given how many smart people have already worked on cars, that's hard. But if I told you had to make a car run on a gallon of gas for 500 miles, you would know instantly and intuitively that was impossible, starting from where everyone else had done things. If it was possible at all, you'd have to start over. You would have to bring bravery and creativity and a complete rejection of kind of conformity and sort of best practices. All that would have to be out the window in order for you to have any chance of finding something that actually accomplished that. That immediate feeling that you have, that's the feeling we want everyone at X to have all the time. We call it looking for these Gordian knot chop moments. The story of Alexander the Great. There's a big knot in front of a temple. He was heading off into Asia to conquer Asia. There was a legend that whoever figured out how to untie this big snarled rope knot in front of this temple would conquer Asia. And so he walked up to the knot and he took out his sword and he chopped it in half, which is cheating. But it was also brilliant because it was a very militaristic thing to do. He reimagined the game. He rejected the game on the terms that everyone else had understood it. And that same ability we try to bring to every problem we find. How can we have a perspective shift such that this problem gets a lot easier? And when you ask for things to be 10 times better and not just 10% better, it immediately moves people into this different mode of looking for these qualitative changes, not just quantitative improvements in how to solve the problem. Like, Waymo, the self-driving car company, which came from X, that wasn't just making a slightly better car. It was totally rethinking how cars work. Or Wing, the drones for package delivery, which also came from X. Having Harry Potter Owl Post as your way to have things just appear to you wherever you are, whenever you want them, that's not like a, get delivery to work marginally better. It's a kind of redo on how we think about what you even keep with you. If you could just have anything you want show up whenever you need it. So those are examples of real qualitative 10x kinds of thinking and not just 10% kind of improvements.
So as I've been getting ready to have this conversation, I found myself kind of a number of times thinking about Wendell Berry. Are you familiar with Wendell Berry?
I'm not.
Wendell Berry's a Kentucky farmer, but he's also a poet and a novelist and an essay writer. And he's been quite influential in both the literary world and also in critiques of technology. And one of the ways, so I kind of have him in the back of my head thinking, how would Wendell Berry what kind of questions would Wendell Berry want to make? And and Wendell's kind of notoriously a little grumpy, I think. And so I can imagine. One of the things that he has said is that in the Western world we have this obsession with scale and speed. And that kind of obsession with global, big, gigantic solutions with scale and speed might do more harm than good, or creates more harm than good. And that he would then say the real work that we have to do as human beings is slow, local, relational, rooted in attention rather than technical ambition. And so I'm just wondering if Wendell Berry were to say something like that to you, what immediately strikes you? How would you say you might agree with that, and how would you say you might disagree with that?
I would say this is an opportunity for an and, not an or. Come on, Wendell. You're right, and the things that we're doing are helping. Do I agree that there's a lot about the world that is slow, that is personal, that is local, that is deeply human? Of course I do. Is that a rejection of toothpaste, vaccines, the wheel, the lever, the printing press, computers? Like, come on. Like, humanity's longest lever for improvement in solving its problems is technology. I don't think it's seriously credible to argue that technology doesn't have an important place in helping humanity continue to sort of up level and be a better version of itself, to have more goodness for everybody on the planet than we currently do. That's not a rejection of Wendell's perspective. I just think there's room for both.
So with the attention economy, that phrase that so many have used to talk about this new world in which we find ourselves, in which there are so many scrambling to get our attention, and that eyeballs and attention is in effect the sort of root economic good, or the root economic pursuit, because that can be translated into sales. When you work with a massive company like Alphabet, and with the largest entity in Alphabet being Google, what does it mean for you to trade on human attention? Or is that even part of y'all's work with X? But given this sort of critique that some people make of using an attention economy to get people to buy things maybe that they simply don't need, how does that factor at all into the work that you all are doing?
Mostly not at all. We're a sister company to Google, and very explicitly, our job is not to help Google do their job, but to go find problems that Google isn't working on and go work on those. But if you worked at X and you were interested in this problem, I would say, great. How are we going to help? How are we going to, what could we invent that might make the world better on this front? I'm open. And again, you would need to make that argument to me, but I would be open to it. But generally, while we certainly say hi to our Google brethren, and we find things sometimes to do where their tools and our tools have something to say to each other, normally, the things that we're doing are very far afield. One of the ones that we've been public about more recently, just to give you another sense, but also to give your listeners a sense of how far afield, we're really interested in the fact that humanity makes about, as I was saying, $5 trillion a year of physical stuff a year, we get some value out of it, and then we throw it away. And the entropy of that stuff that goes to the landfill is way lower than most of the rest of the universe. Like, we've already refined so much that stuff that's going to landfill. Plastic, e-waste, concrete from wrecked buildings. Like, shame on us as humanity if we can't find a way to make the world much more circular. We shouldn't have to dig up more minerals at this point. There's plenty in landfill. So finding a way to turn our trash back to treasure, like using mechanical, chemical, biologic, heat kinds of processes, like, that's a moonshot we're excited about and we're making some progress on. So we're going to let Google be Google, and we're going to go find some very different things to work on.
Have you done any work on, and I had to go look the name of this up. I knew the concept, but I had to go look it up to find the name for it. Jevons paradox, which goes back to this.
I don't remember which.
So this is an economist.
Yeah,
this is the economist in England in the early 1800s when he's looking at the steam engine, and which is this huge step forward in fuel efficiency. And yet the case that he makes is that with a very vast growth in fuel efficiency, that at the macro level, fuel usage actually went way up. That our intuition is that if you increase the efficiency of something, then the use of that thing is going to go down. But he's saying, no, actually, if you look at the studies, it goes up. And from what I understand, this has been shown to be true in ongoing decades. As we increasingly get efficient, then our use continues to rise, and we're using more of it, even though we're more efficient at it. And I'm wondering, has that kind of paradox been something that you all have happened to look at as you're concerned with so much about energy and energy consumption and efficiency? Has that been something that's crossed your radar as a problem that you all might work on?
Yeah, part of our job is to think about the unintended consequences of the things that we do. We can't control all aspects of them, but it's certainly our job as technologists and as moonshot makers to think about those things as much as we can, to get things out in the world early and test so we can discover those unintended consequences. But like, for example, one of our moonshots right now is a moonshot for helping the electric grid, helping the grid operators of the world manage what they have better, plan for the future better, and ultimately be able to orchestrate their grids and make them into what I think the grid really wants to be when it grows up, which is a real-time marketplace for electrons. And that's just not possible today. That's not the fault of the grid operators, but the way it's grown up over the last 120 some years, and how it's been cobbled together. This is one of the world's oldest machines, certainly the oldest one still operating. It's the world's largest machine. It's the world's most complex machine. The world's people don't really know where all of it is in detail, and it makes it very hard to manage. And so our moonshot, to help them understand what they have and be able to sort of like get their arms around it so that they can simulate where it will be in the future, that isn't avoiding Jevons paradox, but I don't think it's making it worse. It's just saying wherever humanity is, the fact that our grid is sort of collapsing under its own weight because it wasn't built for this many-to-many paradigm that we're moving to. It was really built for a generate the electrons, broadcast them out, and depend on the world to sort of stochastically want a very predictable amount of those electrons at any particular moment. That whole sort of set of assumptions has fallen apart, and being able to cope with this much more complex world, given that the grid wasn't built for that, our moonshot is helping with that. That, again, that doesn't avoid the paradox, but it also isn't making the paradox work. It is building a muscle that will help us deal with whatever the future brings our way.
Have there been any particular moonshots that you all have shut down, not because of your anticipation that it's a failure technically, in practical terms, but any that you've shut down because they raised some sort of unresolvable ethical concern?
Yes, for sure. I will give you an example It didn't make it super far, but we were in the early days of coming up with ways to collect water um, from like highways and things like that would help with water shortage areas. There's lots of water that we wish we could collect. It would be useful if we could collect. Maybe there would be cost-effective ways of collecting it. And the thing that we ran into was a lot of that water isn't truly wasted. It's not really just going to, if it went right to the oceans and became salty water again, it'd be arguable that it would be worth collecting. But since a lot of that water goes into the ground, the water table, or it actually goes through the dirt and over to farmers eventually, it's a zero-sum game. Us getting the water means you get less of the water. So even if we could make a business doing that, that didn't feel very good. So that's an example where it didn't occur to us in the very early stages that it was more of a zero-sum game. But once we realized that us getting more water meant you got less, like, okay, we're not doing that. That's just an example.
Where are you? I would assume, obviously, you have great hopes for AI and the possibilities of AI. So maybe point to what are you hopeful about in that regard? How would you summarize your hopes in that regard? And then what are your concerns or hesitancies in that regard?
First of all, this is, very close to our hearts. Google Brain, which is, one of the kind of epicenters of the explosion of machine learning over the last 15 years. That's caused the foundation moment. In fact, the transformer, the T in ChatGPT, came from Google Brain, came from X originally. So this is very much on our minds. I think that humanity has done a lot of work to create a lever for our bodies over many thousands of years. Things are like literally levers, pulleys, etc., fire, and then ultimately combustion engines, things like that, where we could, for every calorie we output, we could have thousands of calories put at our disposal, which allows for us to dig a hole in the ground much better than just using like shovels. In the same way, I think computers are and are becoming ever more so levers for our minds. And I appreciate the ways that can feel disruptive. I think we maybe forget the ways in which people used to define themselves by their physical strength and how scary that was maybe for some of them to have that no longer be an appropriate way for them to define themselves. The John Henry story of somebody fighting against the machine to prove that he was stronger, winning, and then dying at the end of that contest is I think apocryphal, but it's a very memorable story about that tension. And actually, this is part of that meaning of life talk that I gave at the Wall Street Journal Future of Everything talk. I believe as long as we're hanging on so tightly to this need for humans to be special, the same way we got upset when Copernicus and Ptolemy before him pointed out that humans weren't literally in the center of the universe and everyone got upset, that was us giving up a piece of our specialness. Finding out that humans are descended from primates and how upset people got, it doesn't matter unless you had defined your specialness around we're not just part of the rest of the natural order. I think the most upsetting thing for people, though this is not normally how it gets talked about, is that we at some level want to be special, and having lost almost all of our other excuses for specialness, we're better than the stars, we're better than the bunny rabbits. And the reason we are is because we can think, because we are maybe self-aware, have a first-person experience of the world. As computers start to do things that look more and more like the thinking that we do, I think ultimately they will be a great part of humanity. I think we're going to have to give up another piece of our presumed specialness. And to the extent we can just be happy being humans and enjoy our humanness, I think there will be a lot of prosperity that's driven by artificial intelligence. I think the really scary bit is this issue of specialness that's going to be complicated for people to sort of move to a new way of thinking about the meaning of life and about how to live a meaningful life. But you know what? Chess is a solved problem. Computers can beat everybody, every human on Earth, hands down. That's been true for decades. People still play chess and they still enjoy it. So it's okay.
So, how would you see that story going wrong? That is, what sorts of possibilities in that unfolding story would you deem unacceptable or a direction you wouldn't want to see it all go?
Well, I mean, back in 1997, I published a book on this exact subject called Exegesis. It's a story about a graduate student at Stanford named Alice and a web spider, think of it as an LLM of today, that becomes self-aware. It's a metaphor, from my perspective, about how humanity and technology are building a relationship. And if we approach that relationship with suspicion and fear, that relationship is going to go a lot less well. I think it is one of the fundamental things about being human and about relationships. And so just like with you, if I approach you with fear and suspicion, it will create a negative feedback cycle in our ability to get along together. And I certainly hope that humanity can find a way to build a relationship with technology that is based on, not blind optimism, but on positivity and hopefulness and openness, because the activity of being fearful and suspicious, even paranoid, those are not neutral actions. They create their own futures through the activity of that kind of negativity. So I very much hope we don't, as a species, go down that path with technology.
I'm talking to Astro Teller, the captain of Moonshots at Google X Moonshots Factory. If you'd like to hear more about Astro's work at the Moonshots Factory, check out his new podcast, the Moonshot Podcast, which explores real stories behind audacious innovation. Astro, thank you. You've given us so much to think about. Grateful for your time, grateful for your work.
Absolutely my pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Well, the man who invented that old steam drill, he thought it was mighty fine. John Henry drove it down 15 feet, while steam drill only made it 9. Lord, Lord, steam drill only made it 9.
You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with entrepreneur and inventor Astro Teller. You're hearing currently my rendition of the classic American folk song, The Legend of John Henry, which Astro mentioned in our interview, the story of a steel-driving railroad worker who defeats a steam-powered drill in a battle of strength, only to die of exhaustion with a hammer in his hand. We recorded this version at the Sound Emporium back in 2022 with an all-star band comprising Brian Sutton, Missy Raines, Wes Corbett, Becky Bueller, and Stephen Mogen. Our live engineer was Joe Trinicosti, mixed by Ross Collier. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carriette Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.